Hello, hello. Welcome back to Detection at Scale, Season 3. Today, I'm here with Gary Hunter, who is the head of security operations over at Trustpilot. Gary, how are we doing?
I'm very good. Thanks, Jack. Yeah.
So Trustpilot's a pretty interesting business to secure, I would imagine. You just said this a moment ago when we were first chatting about this episode. Trustpilot's really a universal symbol of trust. So how does that affect how you sort of lead as the head of security operations?
Yeah, it definitely puts the table stakes pretty high, right? So kicking off your day every day, you know that there are people that look at that logo, that look at those scores, that are all over those businesses across the world, really, and really rely on that being a kind of reliable thing. So we need to keep those accounts secure. We'd have to keep that platform really tight. But we carry that mantra into what we want to do, right? Nobody's ever going to be bulletproof when it comes to this, but we definitely do our best to represent our customers and protect our platform as much as we can.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background. So how did you get here? I think you also mentioned that you built the team up at Trustpilot. So just give us a little sense of your background in security.
Yeah, I had a little career before. I was doing various different things. I was a wedding DJ at one point and would have helped many people out get married over the course of my kind of previous career, along with various other little jobs, and moved into tech quite aggressively. I'm based over here in the UK in Edinburgh. It's a very tight-knit community that we've got. I started at one of our kind of big unicorns that we would have had, which is Skyscanner, doing flight search, global reach company, a lot of really interesting things going on. Flight searches from the Antarctica station, where the British kind of hold a research station over there, people searching for flights from North Korea. So sometimes you have to kind of take a nuanced approach to your detections. Just because you've got that piece of traffic coming from North Korea doesn't mean it's not genuine. And then I was security hire effectively number one, moving over at Trustpilot. So my CISO brought me in to lead up security operations. And it was a journey of, okay, we're going to bootstrap this. We're going to ask for what we need as we go, and we're going to make the most of what we have. So we went from the two of us to now a team of 10, split. I have 3 direct reports in my operations team. There's a team in platform security, which does a combination of cloud and application security as well. So, and a couple of the team in GRC as well. So we have those subject matter experts across the team, but we try and blend that and try and keep the silos as low as possible so that we all know what we're working on, but also we can lean on each other's skills and insights, because we've all had different backgrounds and different experiences, which is great.
So what was your framework for building up the team?
Yeah, it was, you start from what's screaming at it, what's the pain points, right? Go across and meet those business leaders. So we had an IT team that was separate to what we would have worked on. We had an SRE team, site reliability engineering team, data platform teams, and then all of our engineering functions. We also hold, as you can imagine, quite a big support function outside of that, customer operations, our sales teams that work with the businesses to onboard them onto the platform. So it's understanding what technologies they're using, where's our risk. We rely heavily on SaaS. We're a cloud-first company, so we operate in 2 major clouds, one for our data lake and one for our compute. So that has its own challenges, and that really dictated my initial POCs. So it started off just looking at your really fundamental security essentials, right? Where do we have MFA? What are we doing with identity? What are we doing with endpoint? What are we doing in cloud today? Understanding the gaps, and then trying to backfill POCs into there to meet those kind of requirements. And as we increased our coverage, increased our detection rate, really got visibility into the platform, it's then a case of, okay, I have 8 hours in a day. If it takes me 15 minutes an alert, that's 32 alerts a day. That's it. That's all you're going to get for as an effective team. Throw in a major incident in there, and some of our reporting requirements in the UK have a dictation to have a report ready within 72 hours. And you've got quite a high pressure situation where you need to scale horizontally as well as vertically as much as possible. So it's finding enabling technologies and justifying where those technologies won't meet your requirements. That's the real challenge. And that's a constant journey where you're maybe lagging behind with people or you're lagging behind with technology, but constraints breed creativity, right? And that's the thing that we've kind of learned the most, is that you can kind of hack stuff together and try your best with what you've got to achieve your goals.
No, I really like that. So the constraints breeding creativity is a awesome quote. And I love how you sort of worked backwards from this is the team I have. This is how long it takes for us to do these core processes so we can do N number of things per day. So, my natural segue is where is AI filling that gap and helping the team scale their throughput?
You could imagine in a team of 10, you're not going to have some really specialist roles, right? So I'm not going to have a forensics team. I'm not going to have a team of, I have teams of people that have the ability to detect and write detection rules, but that's not their main bread and butter, right? That's the ones that it's ancillary to their role. It's in addition to their role. So where we don't have those individual specialisms, that's where we really lean on it, right? So where can we use AI to leverage threat detection rules? Can we have it create those, even if it's 90% correct or 70% correct, it's not got the right log source, it's not got the right field that it's looking at, it's inserted the wrong technology, but then we can tweak that and pivot on that rule pretty quickly. And then we use it in really our workflows, right? So we'll use a SOAR to triage most of our stuff automatically. We need to run as fast as our attackers run. Any attacker is doing their best to feed themselves, to supply themselves with an income. There's lots of different motivations for different attackers, right? But they will be dogged in their determination to effectively break into your company. So we use AI to really triage that fire hose that comes out the back, right? So having workflows that effectively take all that JSON, parse it, apply some of our logic to it, and then they have a couple different options at the end of it, or a few different options. They might default closed, default open, or they might send it for triage for follow-up, right? Which might be an escalation internally, but it might also be sending it to an end user, because a lot of the time end users report phishing emails, right? Or they have impossible travel activity. These kind of like legacy traditional detection rule equals bad thing doesn't always mean it's bad. A lot of the time we go through those, they come out as false positives. But if we had the context of the end user, we could get there faster. So we'll route some of that through the instant messaging platforms using an AI to transform that complex security alert into something that an end user can understand, regardless of their technical ability, right? Not everybody's a security expert and knows what atypical impossible travel is, or insert your name here, depending on your detection. So it's about making it accessible as well as leveraging it for the purposes of making our team more specialized.
What was the onboarding process like for going from a team with no AI to a team utilizing AI in various places? Because I think about that gap a lot, and I'm always curious about what was most effective in the team learning how to use AI appropriately?
Yeah, there's an interesting model, right? We want to iterate quickly, right? We have to iterate quickly to keep up pace, right? Every attacker on the planet will be using this technology and every piece of technology they can get their hands on in order to break into your org. And one of the big pieces that we've kind of learned is you're never going to get it right on the first time. These models, large language models especially, but even machine learning models, they can be interesting in how they process things in their output. So what we'll try and do is we might not take a large language model as an example, which we can embed within our workflows. Say we give it an alert, we give it all the context, we enrich all of that. Original IPs are enriched, end users are enriched. So all the role of the person, the manager that they are, the working location they're in, the type of device they're on, all of that's enriched. It's a lot of information. But we might not know what prompt, if we give it that input, is going to produce the best results. Well, this is the point of machines, right? Just give it 3. So we'll write 3 different prompts and we'll pass it the same input and we'll measure its output. And you can kind of have this competitive model for these outputs, effectively ABC testing each of your different models. Now, we'll do that as a development stage, right? We're not going to do that in production. In production, we'll select the winner and that winner gets promoted into production. But while we're testing rules and response playbooks, we look at ABC and we pick a winner out of that. That democratizes everybody's ability to learn with these tools as well, right? So I might have someone that identifies as an expert for doing that, but I might have someone who thinks completely differently, who has an alternative prompt or an alternative logic that we can test that, which becomes very inclusive. And then we all learn from that. So the tide rises. And that's been really interesting because part of this is onboarding the AI is a technical challenge, but it's also a cultural one as well, right? You want to make your team feel safe. You want to make them feel like you're not going to replace them, because I'll be honest, that's not my ambition. I have a fantastic team. If I had to rehire them, I would probably struggle in a lot of ways. But being able to empower them to use these technologies and show them that we're leveraging it in a way that takes the best of the people and combines it with the best of the AI and then moves them on to higher order tasks, right? There'll always be things that they have to respond to. There will always be questions from others in the business who want to know how that incident response is going. You know, how many of this type of alert did we have? And that's something that today we need them for. But there's also like all the shift left security work that it actually makes a difference to our security posture. Alert triaging is the main priority. If we've got these alerts, we need to look at them, right? They might have something meaningful in them, but at the end of the day, security prevention is the primary pillar of what we do. It's prevention, detection, and then response. That's how we want to put our priorities. Prevention should always be the thing that we spend the majority of our time on.
So let's go a little deeper into use cases. So alert triaging, probably the most obvious use cases for agents, but I think you started to allude to this, but like which other realms of security are you having like high success with AI agents?
So you've seen things like, you've heard the traditional phishing things, right? Phishing is easy. It's all text. It's all in the headers of the emails. One of the most interesting things we do is we have a brand protection partner. We see quite a lot of our brand being used in a way that misleads consumers, right? So rather than actually doing the hard work of collecting these reviews and getting a good positive rating on our platform, well, you can just shortcut it by making a copycat domain, taking our branding and trying to kind of impersonate us. So we have a detection pipeline for that. We have a couple different sources for those, using similar names, for example, but we also have a platform that does they're using AI to do some detection of our image and brand being used elsewhere on sites, but we still treat that like any other security alert, and we'll take that into our pipeline. And then that multimodal capability where you're passing it the image of the screenshot of the website, maybe it's the HTML content of the website as a kind of JSON blob as well, which is quite easy to do nowadays. And then just asking it, okay, how infringing is this? And then giving it that score, right? So just score it on a 0 to 100 and then using that score to determine what we're going to do with it afterwards, right? So we found quite good success in that, to be fair. And that's issuing a kind of brand infringement can be quite a dangerous thing to do because it's quite a heavy hammer to swing for someone that's just using your logo. And there might be a lot of reasons why they're doing that. So we have some kind of keyword filters and some safety checks and some balances in there, right? So that's where the kind of workflow with the AI comes together. But we do look forward to the day that we can kind of package all that up as an agent and really use that in a way that's a little bit smarter. But at this point in time, it's definitely something we have a workflow with those kind of safety guards in place and those railings in place.
Talk a little bit more about the guardrails. So how do you make agents safe and secure when you're using them in something very sensitive, which is security operations or security broadly?
Yeah, it's understanding what the limitations are, right? I mean, you'll know from using chat agents or from quite generically using these tools that, I think I asked it to generate a piece of code not long ago and it generated a PyPy library that didn't exist, right? Very different if you're doing it in the platform security world and the application security world, right? The same tools that we've had for a long time to scan those CI/CD pipelines before code goes to production still apply today, right? There are modern versions of those where we have AI built in and other capabilities to do that in a smarter way, but that's largely optimizing the problem. Where we use it in our workflows, we talk about is that what would we not want it to do? So treat it like the intern, right? It's like, if you give the intern all of the tools, the ability to lock a user, the ability to wipe a machine, the ability to take a website down, what would you train that intern to do before they issued those tools? And it's about codifying those. So making that into your playbook, backing it up, pushing out as infrastructure as code is all part of that. And then that becomes part of your, this is somewhere where governance is limiting at the moment, but where security compliance isn't asking how are you balancing these agents uses yet. But I'm quite sure one day we might end up in a situation where if you're going to an auditor saying, I use agents, the question will quickly be followed by, and how do you govern them? And how do you make sure that they're compliant with whatever the regulation is at the time?
So on this topic, I recorded a show yesterday with a guest who's at a very prominent AI company, and he worked on this standard called AIUC-1, and it has a lot of these compliance checks, across the realm, security, reliability, et cetera. So it's a really good framework for us as builders or users to help orient what should those guardrails be? How do we deliver this securely? And I like how you thought about it in the inverse, which is like, how could this go poorly? And how would I explain delegating this to a junior member of the team? So I think that's a really strong framework. Good mindset. Thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting to see both sides, right? Because frameworks are what we use as small, nimble teams, right? We like those frameworks and we adapt them wherever possible, right? We look at many of especially the ones that come out of US government and things, because they tend to be quite heavily adopted, which then makes them something that our compliance auditors and various people will flock to.
Yeah. So what level of autonomy are you at today? So obviously it could be really basic of enrichment and go all the way up to tool calling, all the way up to this thing is just running kind of unsupervised and we check in on it every now and then. Like, where are you on that spectrum?
Per use case, right? So for brand protection, for those kind of really noisy alerts, that they're the ones that we target the same way that a traditional SOC would look at things, right? They'll go bottom up from noisiest alert, which is going to have the biggest impact if we automate this. Those are largely taken care of, right? So we'll have those automatic playbooks that do that, enriched with that AI capability to give us that additional piece. And then we'll have ones that we're on that journey with, right? That we're still unsure about. Maybe they're in testing, maybe they're something that we're less confident in, or maybe our coverage isn't as good and we need additional log sources to be able to enrich that. There's a world where I'm not confident that the tools we have today will be the tools I'll use tomorrow, right? We might end up in a world where our SIM becomes effectively a data lake that an MCP server talks to and all these PCs. And I see these bits, and very much we want to be innovating, but we don't want to be on the bleeding edge because that has its own risk, right? Having tools taken away from you because they're pivoting is an example. We've seen that in some of the startups out there in the world that are, there was agentic browsers that have pivoted their model because maybe the monetization isn't as strong. It's a side example, but in security, there may be the same in future.
That's a really interesting mindset of, not wanting to be too much of an early adopter for these startups that might be pivoting, or, their business is very immature and they're still trying to figure out what's going to create a flywheel for them. It's very interesting. Let's transition a little to detection. So what's been your team's mindset with building detections, especially with the concept of having AI agents on the other side of those detections?
Yeah, detections are, it's noise, right? We want to look at behaviors as much as possible. So there's the concept of your crown jewels and protecting those. It's very good for us in the UK as we get quite attached to our crown jewels over here. But the idea that you want to protect that data as much as possible and have that defense in depth model to it. But largely, you want to make them as narrow as possible, but at the same point, as wide, as broad as possible, right? But I think that's the AI advantage. It's if we have these really noisy alerts, but actually most of them are noise, but 1 in 100 might be something worthwhile. That's where we're like, okay, triage this regardless and tell me if it's something that I should be worried about. It'd be great if that was the prompt that we put into these agents today. They're not quite there to be able to take that prompt in. Yeah, that tends to be the challenge in today's kind of current posture.
If we click into that a little deeper, how would we want to train our agents to spot that 1 in 100?
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance, and especially in the UK and Europe, right, around about data residency, data governance, and the usage of it, right? Because the tech person may wants to say, give it all the data, train on all the data, But I guess that goes back to like, maybe that is the case, but you just need to make sure you're extremely confident in your sanitization of it, right? Making sure that, because I see data breaches quite regularly, and their notification process and under GDPR here is quite aggressive. So they'll be quite explicit what categories have been leaked. And I can think of examples of PIN numbers leaking into production logs and systems for buying. I can think of email addresses and address information being leaked into different production systems as well. So there's a little bit of governance on that, but it's a case of, that'll be an interesting day when I see an agent that effectively works like a threat hunter, right? Because that's the roles we want our teams to be doing, but that's not at least that's not the stage I'm at as a kind of maturity stage for having an AI agent, agentic threat hunter in my team. But it'll be an interesting day, and it's making sure you've selected a technology that will do that. Some of the largest SIM vendors, they're not going to probably offer that. They're going to have to maybe re-architect the underlying infrastructure. It can't speak to exactly how they're going to pivot their products, but some of them you do wonder. And for people that have maybe rolled out that internally and are rolling it themselves, right? That's going to be a difficult and painful thing that they're going to have to manage that migration. It's hard enough in the cloud when you need to port your data from cloud to cloud and the cost that's associated with that. It'll be another thing completely for an on-premise world, right? So it'll be interesting to see who rises up to meet that demand.
Yeah, I mean, I can obviously speak to how we're handling it, right? Like, I think reasoning is a very challenging thing to replicate, even in agents. There's natural strengths of LLMs, though, right? That we should be always taking advantage of in SecOps. I think tool calling is one of them. It's a fairly low risk thing that has a massive productivity improvement. So instead of having to understand the nuance of the query language, and this applies in any products or any technology, really, right? Whether you're running the data lake yourself on something like BigQuery, whether you're using some off-the-shelf tool that it's abstracting it from you, like tool calling is just a massive, massive save. And that applies in threat hunting. It applies for you as a leader, trying to understand the high-level program. So I think tool calling is a massive, massive one. On human reasoning, though, I always think about it in layers, because there's the organization, then there's the behavior that you want to detect, and then there's the history of what you've observed. And then you have the underlying foundation model too, which is like, what was the corpus of data that was trained on? So these all affect the final response from the model, in addition to your prompts, your temperature, all these things, right? So tons and tons of variables. But the thing I always come back to is, if you can accurately declare your organization's threat models, the things that are important to the organization, and give that to the LLM, it tends to perform fairly well. But it still needs that level of human oversight, I think, probably indefinitely until we reach super intelligence on the models, which, like, TBD. But it's important, I think, for us all to remember that LLMs are just pattern matching. So as much as possible, the more that we can give it these patterns and say, hey, like, these are the types of things you want to look for, and don't just expect it to do magic for you, right? Like, we should be realistic. I think we can start to really make positive progress on the delegation of reasoning. But I think it's a very hard thing to get right. The question that I always have for folks is like, how have they been documenting institutional knowledge? Because I think in the world of AI agents, that becomes so important. Like, you have to have this bridge in between what's in your heads around what's most important and what the highest risk areas are, and then how your agents are complementing your human team. So how do you think about that declaration of, like, organization best practices, risk, like things that are most important?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been quite a kind of strong piece is that if we build a really mature security organization and we build this quite mature processes, and we have a situation that there are people that we will leave behind even within an org, right? Who maybe don't have the technical knowledge or the ability to hook into that. Enterprise search is this thing that various products will label that just give us all your data and we'll take care of the structure. We have personal experiment with that, and personally I have done that as well. And what I find is that if you just point it at your corpus of documentation, it tends to get confused over the answer, right? Because what you don't realize is it's offered by multiple people. You didn't realize that there's a conflicting piece of information or even just something that was incorrectly labeled or similarly labeled that it's picked up on that isn't relevant. So it comes back with this irrelevant answer. So really, we've looked at agents within our knowledge base and we point them at a very restrictive kind of set of documentation. It comes back to that codifying, right? There's an AI startup here in Edinburgh that does legal reviews. So what they'll do is they'll take your documentation and they'll answer your governance questions for you. But they have a very here's how to prepare the documentation, here's how to structure it. And then there's that chat interface that you can then ask it, am I X compliant? And it will come back and what's your control around about MFA? And it will answer that question and it will reference it as well, right? And that's that. Even with that tool, we still went through a stage of verifying answers as well for that use case, right? When it comes to law, it's you want the answers verified. So we had those verified answers and we learned to pull back on some of the information it had and give it in a structure that was better. Some of the tables we make up for these things are not the best structure, and trying to keep it more concise. So it's sometimes less is more in that regard, but also that codifying it, right? If your processes are 120 documents long, they're probably not being read by anybody in the org, let alone a large language model, right? They're just very complex. They should be pretty punchy and quite easy to digest.
Yeah. The attention mechanism is a very powerful thing.
Yes.
But I fully agree. Less is more. Less is more in instructions. Less is more in context a lot of the time. If you just dump a bunch of raw data into a model, it's gonna drift into the ether in a lot of ways. But I guess how are you seeing, kind of the next series of human behavior is if we're gonna begin delegating things to agents, what do we uniquely focus on? And you alluded to this a little, but how are you seeing this evolution play out in your team where they are using agents on a daily basis? Where are you seeing people spend more time?
Yeah, I mean, that's the bit that really excites me about this thing, because there will be a lot of organizations, might be slightly different in the US, but tech adoption in the UK and Europe may be slightly different in that regard. We hear these numbers about AI adoption and it's faster and it's slower, and various companies laying off staff but then bringing them back 6 months later. But the most interesting thing for me is what's the impact it's having on the team, and for the team it's I've now got the time to go and deal with this thing. If I've got 4 team members and we take 20% alert triaging off them, I nearly add a full team member back into the team to do that, and it just takes that cognitive load back off. It takes that pressure back off them. It gives them the ability to breathe. So there's a human aspect to that, but they also have a backlog of a wish list of things they want to do longer than anything else. And it just lets them start picking away at that backlog and really digging into the shift left things, right? That's the work that's really impactful. For a lot of time, you could argue that alert triaging is security theater, right? There's so many of them are false positive. Our false positive rate is high, but I can imagine others is higher. And I see teams that produce 20-page long threat reports off the back of an email click for a phishing email. And I wonder who reads those and how can you justify producing those, in a lot of cases. To me, that's security theater. And instead, I want to see generalists within team, right? We try not to silo people. We talk about not having those specialists earlier in the call, but that means that I can largely take people that I've got and move them into areas where I need them, right? Because they can then choose to go, well, I'm going to do more threat hunting this next quarter, or I'm going to go and partner with that team because actually that team is causing a lot of these alerts or is feeling a lot of the pain. And that's normally what these alerts mean, right? People signing in on VPNs is probably because they have a legitimate business use case that's not being met by the business. We don't spend enough time engaging with our businesses and listening to them, and then ultimately prioritizing their work as well, mostly because we have a lot of our own priorities and a lot of our own requirements that we want to hit first. But there is a point where I think there's a tipping of the scale where, I've been through that curve of pain, right? Where you have that coverage increasing, you peak pain where you've then got a huge amount of alerts and you need to then shift left and either prevent it or build automatic detections and automatic remediation. And then you come down that curve. And then if you've been through that and you enjoy that, as many of us, I think, in this industry do, you end up in a position where you maybe don't feel as satisfied. So then you look for what else is exciting, right? And that, to me, that now is helping people build their skills to kind of be resilient to this change that's happening, but also to protect the business in a way that a lot of orgs, I think, are waking up to, but aren't quite there yet.
Are there other areas in security where, not just detection and response, but like, have you had good luck in using agents for things like secure coding and like other domains of the business that help the products stay secure, and hence, more of like the shift left mindset, right? Where are you seeing benefits there?
Yeah, so we'll outsource some things, right? As you can imagine, it's all about that specialism within the teams. And we work with a lot of partners that are, they're using AI to parse your software bill of materials, to look at your dependencies, to understand your risk. They're also looking at it in terms of containers and making sure that they're as kind of lightweight and as resilient as possible. I mean, one of the biggest areas, and it's not the sexiest area, right, is the governance, risk, and compliance thing. Like, what open source intelligence report can you put together using an AI? And the moment that ticket comes in, so you're onboarding a new vendor, you want to onboard Panther Labs, right? You want to bring in that tool, you have a use case for it, but I maybe don't understand that use case, right? Especially if you're in marketing or something and you need that tool. That's not my home turf, right? So like sometimes they won't give the most complete reasoning and the most complete context. So that's where I think we've got this opportunity to then take all that input and summarize it very briefly into like, is this a business case? Send it back to the end user and get that clarification. Like, is this what you're meaning when you say using it, right? We've elaborated on it, we've enriched it with external sources a little bit. And if they sign off on that, that can speed up our process. They might also miss information like the due date and things as well. So you can have it kind of go through that basic governance check. Because it's surprising when I look at vendor management processes and how much human toil is spent in those areas. And at the end of the day, I don't know if that current human toil actually delivers real security impact again. Lots of business compromises that we're hearing of, in the news all around us every day come from suppliers. And I'm quite sure there was many, many vendor managers and many, many governance teams and legal teams and sales teams behind the scenes doing their governance, and they still found themselves in that situation. So if we can speed that process up, we can cycle vendors a bit quicker. So in the event something happens, you can move quite quickly and pivot, sometimes to get ahead of it, right? Or sometimes just to react to it afterwards. So this vendor management process, this doing a proof of concept, taking on a more cavalier startup company, which you might not consider because your process knows that, they might not have the governance checks and the requirements in advance. You can kind of automate some of that and pull some of that information in a less structured way, which we think quite exciting.
Awesome. Gary, I want to start to wrap things up on the show. And I have two questions. The first question is, what was like a big shift this year in terms of your security program? Like, what are you proud of? And how are you thinking about going into next year? And then I have a final question after that.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. I mean, we were experiencing quite a large volume of a particular type of incident, right? And I think we had talked about that a lot internally. We had documented that a lot internally, and that was a pain point for us. But what we'd managed to do was really create that cohesive story. And we leaned in on that. We really leaned in. It's very easy for a security team to feel the pain, but not be able to communicate, so what? right? So what? Like, I pay you to respond to incidents in some businesses. That is the attitude. Now, it's not the attitude here, but like it's harder for that security team to get out of that incident response piece and look at it and go, well, holistically, why don't we just do X? And here's the research and the implementation for it. And we really got a big buy-in earlier this year on a particular piece of change that we needed to make. And since that happened, it's been a dramatic decrease in the number of high impacting incidents. And that's just lifted so much weight off the team and just given them so much more freedom to work on what they want and not have their time dictated by incidents. And then that's the opportunity for next year, right? Okay, so we've now got this time, we've got these tools that are evolving really quickly underneath us. We have a tech stack that we believe in quite strongly, a good threat intelligence built into it, good detection capabilities, good automation capabilities, with the ability to then lean in and to this AI world and potentially with this MCP world in front of us. So it's about, let's do something really bold with this that leverages the best of the people we've got and the best of the technology. And then let's see where that leaves us. I mean, every year we do this review of where we were last year, and it consistently surprises me to think of the things that we've completely shifted left or don't worry about anymore that were 60% of our workload in the previous year.
I love that. That's great. It's good to do that exercise every year. Fully agree with that. To wrap things up, I'd love just 3 pieces of advice for other security leaders starting their program from scratch, and especially since you just went through this process in the last few years.
Yeah, I think it's that phrase of leaning in, right? Learn, listen to the business, adapt to their needs. There's a concept of being T-shaped, which I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with. That's quite broadly accepted. So that breadth of knowledge, but that depth of expertise in a particular area. Understand that as a security leader, it's not your job to be an expert in everything, but bring in those experts and don't let people tie themselves to a particular technology or let them identify as a particular expert in a particular technology. We're here to have the phrase of weatherproof people, right? This idea that regardless of where the tools and technology go, we have these resilient individuals that are capable to learn anything. So if I pivot from one of the major cloud providers to another, water off a duck's back, right? They have this coating around them. And that experimentation piece would be my second piece on that, right? How do you learn? That experimentation piece is big. Create an environment and a tool set that doesn't scale with what doesn't cost when it scales, right? It scales in a way that encourages experimentation so that people can feel empowered to get in and experiment with, especially with this AI world, right? No, I don't think any company today or any individual in a company today has the answer to this. As you say, they're largely predicting the response and what should be said next. So let's see where we can leverage that and try and just create a playground for that so that they can really experiment and then we'll all learn from that and share that back. And then the final one is probably trade-offs. We all have a set number of hours in a week. So have a way to capture ideas, have a way to capture a backlog that doesn't create that load on your team. I have team members that if I put 500 tickets in my backlog, the team will feel, some of them will feel disempowered by that because they'll feel like, oh my God, it's never ending. But the reality is we sometimes need to capture those ideas because when we come to review what's next, we need a list of the art of possible and we need these knowledge. And sometimes knowledge finds us at the most unusual of times. So have a really frictionless way to capture that knowledge and those ideas so that you can transform them into really impactful change.
Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show. I thought that was an awesome conclusion, leaning into the business, encouraging experimentation, always weighing trade-offs, focusing on what's most important. I think those are really inspirational sort of mindsets for everyone to keep. So thank you for your time. It's great to meet you. Do you have anything to plug? Any hiring you're doing? Anything you want to broadcast out?
We'll see where we come next year. Hopefully we can grow the team from 10 in the new year. So I have my fingers and toes crossed for that, as that goes for a publicly traded company. So I'll have to appease a bunch of people to get those roles approved. But hopefully we'll be able to do that and bring some more people in, some different ideas. But yeah, if anyone wants to ever reach out and contact me, I'm on LinkedIn, Gary Hunter at Trustpilot sort of thing. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right. And for more episodes of Detection at Scale, you can go to our website, detectionatscale.com, read a bunch of blogs about the AI topics we discussed here, and listen to past episodes and learn from other leaders like Gary. Thank you.